Hello and welcome. I am delighted on behalf of TheOneRing.net to have a chance to have a conversation with the incredibly talented Paris Paloma. My name is Kelly, but some of you may know me as Keely from the YouTube channel Happy Hobbit. Paris Paloma is a singer-songwriter whose debut album Cacophony came out earlier this year in 2024. And we are now so excited to welcome her into the folds of the Tolkien fandom, which I believe she's been a part of before contributing artistically. But now we get to have her incredible talent shared with all of us Middle Earth fans. Paris, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, as as a fan of yours, even before like the your song The Writer came out, which is the closing song for The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim. I was lurking around in your Discord and I got to ask you a question at one point because I noticed on your Instagram that you made a reference to Arwen. And I was like,
Mhm.
are you a Tolkien fan? And you're like, I'm a massive Tolkien fan. So I would love to hear what your journey with Tolkien has been, how you discovered it, what pulls you in.
Yeah, I discovered the world of Tolkien when I was 13, when the Hobbit films were coming out, that Peter Jackson's Hobbit films, and I went to see them like in the cinema, um, and just like immediately fell in love with that world. I loved it so much. Um, And so I remember watching that first film, and then I went away and I watched all of the Lord of the Rings, and I read The Hobbit and read the books. And so kind of was, embedded in that world by the time the second Hobbit film went to cinema. Um, and also, I was a huge fan of Ed Sheeran at the time, and he was a massive part of my like journey into songwriting and the reason why I first got a guitar. Um, and he did the song for the Desolation of Smaug film, which blew my mind at the time. That was my equivalent. And it was insane because I was such a huge fan by that point of the Hobbit films and the Lord of the Rings and Ed Sheeran, and he did that beautiful song I See Fire. So it's an understatement to say that it's a dream come true to have done the song for the War of the Rohirrim.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. And so that there you go. That's proof that like by creating these films and having this visual medium, it helps introduce new audience members to Tolkien's work and then in turn leads them to the books.
Absolutely.
So obviously, The War of the Rohirrim is an adaptation. What was it like for you to work with people like Phoebe Giddens and use those lyrics and bring them to life because you did it in such an incredibly haunting and impactful way?
It was just such an honor, a joy, and a privilege to work with minds that are so embedded in the world of Tolkien. Not only Phoebe and Artie, but also Philippa, and then to also have this like beautifully enlightened input every so often from Fran Walsh as well, who um contributed like a lot in terms of pulling exactly from the source text for the song, um and lyrics that are in that. It was wonderful watching them work and being a part of that with them, um to be embedded like within a world with people who have been part of that world for so long and understand the gravity of what that means to, someone like me who has been such it's strange calling myself a fan of it. It feels like I'm absolutely wrapped up in that world. It's been such a huge part um of my upbringing, of my like personality development. I think Tolkien's stories are timeless and perfect and empathetic in that way.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So how, like, so much of your body of work is so incredibly layered, and it speaks to me in a way that few artists' work does. And a lot of your perspective, or this perspective that the narrators in your songs are sharing, is that of the female experience in the patriarchy that often goes unsaid.
Mm.
Um, your song Labor has been referred to as an anthem. It definitely feels like an anthem to me. And the writer pulls on that while not specifically naming a woman. We can infer that it's from Hera, it's about Hera. What was it like for you to have that culmination of not only getting to work in the world of Tolkien, but to elevate the female presence in Tolkien, which is often not as elevated as perhaps it could be, and then sorry, I'm going all over here. And then in turn, get to work with these women who have probably felt like idols or icons. They certainly do to me in the Tolkien space.
I think the War of the Rohirrim is such a beautiful film because, like you say, it doesn't deify the presence of women in the world of Middle Earth. It presents them as people who exhibit the same strength and empathy and um the same like unwavering spirit that like the men are celebrated for. Um, I think the character of Hela is one that resonates so strongly with women everywhere. When you see the film, she is persistently this voice of strength and wisdom and patience, um, in the face of like unbelieving and skepticism and these unbelieving men who are so caught up in their own fights and their own honor and ego and all of these very masculine ideals which ultimately do become their downfall. I think also it there's really beautiful themes of um like community ties intergenerationally between women and the passage of wisdom in that way, which is so important to the movement of like of women empowering their voices is those conversations and you watch it happen in the War of the Rohirrim. I think it's such a beautiful choice to to have Hera be the central character in the story because without like spoilers that she is the only one who could consistently narrate that tale of all the other characters and Hammerhand as well, and they it's done so beautifully. And Gaia is such a force of nature who brought Hedda to life. She's so wonderful, um, so compassionate in her performance and as a person. And I'm very happy to have befriended her throughout this project.
That's amazing. How cool that you can walk away with things that matter in the real world, in the real life, like these friendships. That's
And Phoebe is just the most empathetic writer, and she cares so fiercely about ego, which I find such a precious treasure, like in writers, and it's that care that has brought a story like this to life without dropping it because she understands it's the importance of it to so many people and to herself. And it was just it was a joy like building this relationship with other women working on this project.
but yeah, in a way, it's like your journey was paralleling Hera's in that you were able to come into this fold of these women, multiple generations of women. Many of them were, I'm sure, wise women for you. And like, what was that like?
It was so wonderful meeting Philippa and Phoebe for the first time and just getting this overwhelming sense that these are people who really believe in you and who believe in your ability to, like, enough to be able to trust you with something that's so important to them. I can't begin to describe how nervous I was for that first meeting with these writers and Phoebe and Philippa and Artie, and David Long, who was one of the writers of the song and has done so much in the world of Middle Earth that I'm a huge fan of. I was so humbled by their belief and just how kind they all were. It's been throughout this entire project has been the most approachable and um compassionate project that I've been a part of.
I've had the privilege of working with the folks at Weta Workshop in Wellington in the past, and I agree. There's something I think it shows in the quality of the output of when you're allowed creatives to work organically and to bring passion as their main tool, and then let them play, let them see what comes up from the ground up rather than that pressure from the top down. Um, it's such a magical and sadly in the creative industry rare
Mm.
atmosphere to have. And so did you sense that as well when you were working with them?
There's just such a pure interest in honoring Tolkien's work consistently, and that's unwavering from Philippa, from Fran, um, from Phoebe and Artie, and uh, that's that translates in the film and also in conversation and in my experience with this wonderful group of people as we worked together, that there's nothing that's like too small to not be important, when like, you know, in the sort of conception of the song, it's everything is so intentional because it requires that amount of care. And that's what this project has become. It's founded on care for a beautiful like world that was built by an amazing man, Tolkien.
What is it about Tolkien's world that is appealing to you, do you think?
I think the themes of like fellowship and also empathy, and this isn't the main part of it, but I think empathy and such gentleness among the ranks of men, I think is so important. It's one of the great tales of war and peril and darkness and light that exist in this world where I don't like you watch it as a woman and you don't feel um like you are watching some toxically masculine fantasy be enacted for the purpose of select male viewers. You're watching human stories and you're reading like human stories, and you see that again when I talk about the way that the writers and the creators of the films approach everything with such care. It's because Tolkien does, and you look at the language the time he takes to describe the smallest things. He had so much time, and he wasn't going to rush the description of these intricate relationships, these, incredibly detailed worlds. And that's so refreshing to take that time. Nowadays, when I feel like everyone wants to get to a point, everyone wants to reach a culmination and have these very black and white relationships. The relationships that Tolkien describes, they're so layered, and the characters are so they have so much depth to them.
Yeah. So you seem like you draw a lot from literature for inspiration and mythology and folklore. You definitely have that in common with the professor. What can you speak to some of those more ancient sources of inspiration for you? Maybe not particularly around the writer, but as an artist on the whole.
Absolutely. I feel drawn to folklore and mythology and history, I think predominantly for the weight it gives to human experience, because whilst the ages and the eras may change, someone in deep mythology or someone in, very distant history was a person experiencing these same complex and nuanced emotions that we do. And in my most vulnerable songs, I tend to, in an attempt to avoid them becoming kind of like pieces of trivia about my life or about my experiences, and to protect my own like sense of privacy, I tend to really shroud them in this layer of folklore and history. But that doesn't just serve the purpose of kind of protecting myself. It further amplifies the weight of those feelings, because they weren't invented when I felt them. It is part of a long line of tradition, a long line of traditions of emotion and feeling and pain and grief and love and all of these things, that I think it's so important to know that that is what it is to be human. And you're kind of seeing reflections of it, of yourself throughout history every time you feel anything.
Yeah. And I've found that when people are attempting to articulate their love of like the fantasy genre on the whole, especially as expressed through Tolkien, keeps coming back to this concept of fantasy feels more real in some ways because it deals with symbols and with archetypes, and it has that small layer of removal from the self that allows people to be a little bit more vulnerable, either in their own expression or in exploring ideas and concepts. And it sounds like you're gravitating toward something similar with your creativity. So before I let you go, Tolkien's books have a lot of songs in them. Are there any songs that he's written in particular that you feel drawn to?
I When I first read The Hobbit, um, and I can't remember if in the films, if in the extended version they do a longer edition of the song, um, because there's only two verses in the Hobbit film, whereas there's many in the book. But the Misty Mountain song was like what absolutely spellbound me, and um, I often think about it, and I'm not sure I would be able to now, but I used to be able to sing it entirely from memory. Um, but that would be my answer. Is that one?
That's very, and it seems like nature is such a boon to you and a source of inspiration.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of
Yeah.
my other favorite songs that you've done is the Village song.
Oh, thank you. It's funny. There's another song on the album as well, called His Land, which I wrote kind of as a sequel of sorts to Village Song, um, but is also really heavily inspired by the entire sequence in the Lord of the Rings, in the Fellowship of the Ring, uh, where Frodo and Sam they're embarking on their initial journey, like from the Shire to Bree and then to the lands beyond. And it's all incredibly moody and green, and it has the tameness of home, but things are becoming like wild and dark, and they've not ventured that far. And that was the kind of the sense that I was trying to evoke when I was writing that song. And I often thought about, I think I was also, maybe I'd read that passage of it recently when I was writing it or something, but yeah.
So, what would you say to the fairies, as we call our Paris Paloma fans, who aren't familiar with Tolkien but are getting interested because they know of your collaboration? What words of wisdom do you have to kind of help entice them into our fold?
I would just say that it's sort of kind of echoing what I said earlier about the reasons why I love it. Um, I adore like old tales and fantasy and kings and castles and these great tales of fellowship and bravery. And but it's like I say, it's hard because so much of that, so many adaptations um are, incredible. Or when you look at something like only recently did we have a translation into English of the Iliad by a woman. I think it was Sophie, not Sophie Wilson. Oh God, I'm absolutely blanking on her name. But and it made it really refreshing to read because all other translations had kind of like funneled it into this masculine fantasy for male readers. Whereas now it kind of exists as a version that I resonate with and is enjoyable to read and honors the experiences of women and men, like, in that myth of the Trojan War. And I'd say like Lord of the Rings feels like that to me. It feels like um an accessible like fantasy home without kind of, I don't know. It's not barren of like empathy and gentleness, and you watch these relationships form as darkness grows and then the overcoming of it. And I think, like you say, the original films, there are some wonderful female characters, but it's so lovely in War of the Rohirrim to have this story that shines that light on the power of like human women's stories within, in Rohan and the community that they built intergenerationally to overcome that darkness.
Was it a moment for you to get to sing in Old English, especially as a British person?
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah.
That's like you're literally bringing the past to life
Yeah.
by singing in this, this
Really,
dead language.
it's incredibly powerful.
Well, thank you so very much for your time. This has been an absolute joy and pleasure. I would probably keep you all day if I could.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I was getting like the little thing that's like, oh, you're about to run out of time on the meeting. So I was panicking, but yes, thank you so much. This has been like great, and I feel like I'm a student of literature and folklore and mythology as well, and so I've been like always been like, oh, I wish I could just like ask her about these things because like if that's what I'm getting from her
Yeah.
work. Yeah,
Oh,
so it's a pleasure to talk with you.
thank you so much for having me.
Yeah,
Look forward to seeing it.
yeah.